So you may have seen that the course text is on Toledo since last weekend. VTK has it too, but there was a bit of confusion. I hope they can print it quickly, but at least you have access to it online. Okay. Second, this week there were sessions on symmetric cryptography. There is another one tomorrow where there were some people asked to go there. Next week there is a session on public key, but I will plan another session. We're working on this. Normally I should have a session date that doesn't conflict for some of you. I asked for it on Tuesday, but I hope to have it this morning, but apparently I have to wait till this afternoon to get it. But there will be another session if you can't make the Monday session. So as you've seen, at the end of the course text, but also in Toledo already before, there is lots of exercises and solutions. So the best way to prepare is to have a look at the theory and maybe try some exercises yourself. You can also give feedback to the assistant, whether you prefer that he or she presents things or actually lets you work. I mean, it's up to you to define this. If you're not prepared at all and you haven't, for those who haven't studied, maybe it's better that things get presented to you, but if you want to work by yourself, you can also say we want to work on things as well. But so the good news for you is that you don't have to go to the sessions if you want to get a solution because they're already in the book. But maybe you want to go there to try to solve things yourself or to ask questions or things which are not clear. But then again, preparation is key. You get benefit from this if you prepare a little bit. Third thing is the presentations. So we have now 3 dates because some people apparently couldn't find flights home anymore at a reasonable price after 21st, which is a bit unfortunate. Christmas is very close to the last lecture, the last day of work. So we have 3 slots. I want to apologize, but some of you have registered for the slots of 2022. Just too late. You know, these slots will no longer happen. They already have been taken. I apologize for this configuration problem. It is a Toledo issue, and we have this problem every year. But Toledo will move to Blackboard Ultra anyway, so next year the problem will hopefully be solved. But so you'll get an email, or I post on Toledo when you can register, choose your slots, okay? And also the articles will be updated. The plan was to have this ready by this morning, but due to the politics I've been doing, it has been a bit delayed. But tomorrow morning you'll get the list of articles and the slots, and you can register for it, okay? And so each slot is 20 minutes, so you have to leave 5 minutes for questions. You're supposed to present in groups of 2 students because there is too many of you. Okay. And again, I think I mentioned this already in the first lecture. The goal is not to put the article on slides. We know you can do this, and in fact, you can ask ChatGPT to do it for you, and you probably get already some slides as well. So, given that there is more tools, we set the standards higher. So you at least have to read a bit around. Maybe you have to make sure you understand things. If there is something you don't understand and you need help, all these papers have been proposed by some researcher in my group, so there is always somebody who knows all the fine details of this paper. Okay, so if you want, I can point you to this person and you can have a discussion as long as you want to ask all your questions. Or you can ask your question to me and I will forward it to the right person to answer it for you if I can't do it myself immediately. Also, some of these articles are a few years old. There is a tool called Google Scholar in which you can find scientific papers, and so you can find papers that cite this paper, so that build up on this work and show maybe what is wrong, because it's not because something is in a paper that is correct. Okay, so maybe they show out is wrong, or that it has been changed, or that there is a new attack, or an improved attack, or a modification of the scheme. So it's not a research task of a week, right? But at least spend a couple of afternoons or a couple of evenings looking at the topic, exploring it a bit, reading a bit more, and trying to then also think of your audience. The audience is you. Okay, so you now spend 2 or 3 evenings on this thing. So your presentation should be interesting for the people around you, right? So they are not experts or haven't studied this in detail, and they should get some benefit out of it. That's also important. So think of your audience. If your article is very mathematical, try to leave it to the essence. I mean, there is rule of thumb. Most of you know this, that you don't put more than 8 or 9 lines on a slide. And that you, for 15 minutes presentation, the absolute maximum is 15 slides. Probably 10 is a much better rule of thumb. Okay. So try to also stay in the time and use this time to entertain your colleagues and give them a valuable message that they also learn something from this. Okay, so you're supposed to attend 2 sessions as well. So otherwise you have to give a presentation for nobody, which is boring. And you're also supposed to ask questions that you're not reading your email there, but actually paying attention and maybe learning something. Okay, is that clear? So you will get an email in Toledo when the thing is ready, right? And I hope somewhere tonight or tomorrow by the latest. And then you still have plenty of time, more than a month to prepare. So, and again, keep it in balance. It's 3 points out of 20. It's mandatory, so if you don't give the presentation, then you fail the course. This is the agreement. But it's 3 out of 20, so this is not a task where you have to spend 5 full days on, right? This is, look at the balance and what you should do. On the other hand, if you just read the article and make 5 slides, and you stand there disinterested, you actually waste your time and the time of your colleagues. I mean, it's kind of also, yeah, you'll get probably 1 out of 3 as the point, but it's kind of, who gains from that? Huh? Good, but it actually, I can only say it matters. I mean, there is quite some people who give a good presentation and pass the course because of this. That has happened several times, so there is some motivation to invest in it. Okay, any more questions about this? So if you have questions, just mail them to me, right? And I'll do my very best to answer them as soon as possible. So if you've been around and you've seen those devices, so of course what is annoying in this protocol is that you have to type this number in this device. So this is still how several banks in Belgium work. So you have to type an 8-digit number, and then you type your PIN code, and then you have to type and take the Mac and copy this. So for most business people, this was too much work. So a very clever optimization was made where the challenge is actually the clock. So you actually have a clock resolution of 1 minute. And so rather than getting a random number, you actually get the time, which you don't have to type in because this device has a clock. And then you just compute the Mac on the time. And this is a password valid for, say, 1 minute. Of course, then you have to make sure that this password cannot be intercepted and used in the same minute on similar systems. So there is some risks there. But of course, there is also more convenience because less to type. There can be problems because if you go to a cold place or warm place, this clock may run faster or slower. So you have to have clever tricks that this device somehow makes sure it's aware of the clock drift, because otherwise, after a while, it stops working. So there is some clever tricks to deal with this. There's an IETF standard called time-based one-time password, TOTP. So this solves most of the problems. Also this protocol, so you no longer need to memorize a key because the key is in your device. If you intercept the communication, you cannot use it because next time there is another random number. Okay. But of course, Bob still has to know your secret and has to have secure storage. So this we haven't solved, that somewhere there is a database with all secret keys. Okay. I'll skip this protocol, but you can look at it. This is another variant. Let's move to public key. So this idea is very simple. Let's replace the random number, stays the same, but let's replace the Mac by a signature. And the signature is computed with a private key and can be verified with the public key. And this is the idea of what EMV, European MasterCard Visa, did. So this is now, if you use a credit card in contact mode, if you insert in the terminal, then the terminal sends a random number, and then the card computes a signature. And this is how the terminal knows it's a legitimate card. And so, of course, I still have to explain to you how the terminal knows the public key of the card, but that's for a different lecture. But somehow it knows this through some certificates. And so now it can actually, even if the terminal is offline, it can check any card that arrives. And at this moment, there is something like 6 or 7 billion of those cards issued. And my guess is about 100 million terminals that can accept these payments. And so now you solve the problem that you have to have secret storage in the terminal. Now you don't have to have secret storage in the terminal. The terminal can even be offline. It doesn't need to talk to your bank who has your key. It can just, based on your public key, check that indeed this card is there. And of course, there is liveliness because there is every time a new question. There were some bugs in terminals. Some terminals always ask the same question. Yeah, then, of course, it doesn't do much good. But if you ask a different question every time, this is very secure. So this kind of solves all the problems. There is just 2 constraints now. One problem is that, Well, a signature, I mean, EMV uses RSA signatures with 2000-bit modulus. This means a signature is 2000 bits. That's 600 digits. If you ask your customers to type 600 digits, they will be really angry. It's not going to work anyway, right? Users can't do this. So this now means you can no longer have the user type stuff. So it means you have to hook up a device to your computer. And that's what actually the credit card industry doesn't want to do. They don't want to deal with card readers in consumer PCs, because then they get billions of calls to their help desk and that costs them money. Okay, so this is why in shops you now work like this, but at home you still just give the credit card number and this super secret 3-digit code, which is highly secure and nobody knows. This is still the mechanism from the 80s that is still being used, because you can't ask users to copy this signature, and they don't want to plug some device in a PC and then say, solve it for us, because my PC does this. Right, that's because the device itself doesn't cost much anymore. Right? These card readers used to be expensive. Today they would be 20 euros or so, or 10 euros. But they just don't want to deal with it. That's the main message here. Now there is another problem, which is a bit more esoteric, is that it could well be that by asking malicious questions, in the end you could learn the private key of the user. Maybe. Normally it's not possible. The cryptography is secure. We don't know how to do this. But in fact, it turns out that if you do things a bit differently, and if you first send a commitment, and then you question, and then the response, if you do this in a clever way, you can actually get zero knowledge, which means that you can prove that Bob learns nothing about the secret key of Alice, but he's sure he spoke to Alice. This is called zero knowledge. So more or less, Alice proves that she knows the key. And there is a simple mathematical proof that actually Bob learns nothing about this key. He's quite sure that he has seen it, but he learns nothing. And how can you prove he learns nothing? Well, in fact, the proof technique is as follows. You show that Bob can generate this whole interaction by himself without speaking to Alice. But of course, not in this way, but then he first chooses the answer and then computes a commitment that matches the challenge. So by reversing the order, Bob can produce the same transaction. So which means that if Bob can produce this interaction cannot never have taught him something about Alice, because he can do it without Alice. It's a very clever trick. And so this is called zero knowledge. It became popular in the 80s for pay TV, the Netflix of the 80s, because RSA was too expensive to implement in smart cards. So EMV was 95. That was the first smart cards with RSA. But in the 80s and early 90s, Canal Plus actually used zero knowledge because it was easier to implement. It was less computational overhead. This is why it was popular. And then it turns out that this is actually a fantastic concept. So today you have anonymous cash because of zero knowledge. If we ever have a secure wallet in Europe that actually I will defend and like, it will have zero knowledge, which means you will prove you're a Belgian citizen, but without revealing more information than that. Or you prove your address, or you prove that you live in Vlaams-Brabant, but nothing else. Or you prove you're over 18 without showing anything. Or you prove you have a signature that's saying that you're registered at KU Leuven, but without anything else. So this is magic. You can prove stuff without showing it, and this is very good for privacy. Also, if you want to do voting, for example, in some elections, you can vote for 3 up to 10 candidates, 3 out of 10 candidates. So you can vote for 0, 1, 2, or 3. So you can prove in zero knowledge that you voted for at most 3 candidates, but you don't reveal how many you voted for. So it's a very, very cool primitive. This has been widely applied now in cryptography. And so this is why Micali and Goldwasser got the Turing Award for this. So there's 3 Turing Awards in cryptography, the RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and zero knowledge. It's like the Nobel Prizes in computer science were given 3 times to cryptographers. Now, there is another problem with this. In fact, the banks hate this mechanism. Why? Because after the interaction, Bob is sure he spoke to Alice, but he can't prove he spoke to Alice. Because in fact, without Alice being there, Bob could have produced the same interaction. So on the one hand, this is a fantastic property. On the other hand, the banks hate it, because if you want evidence that somebody was there, which is what the banks want, if the money was gone, they want to have evidence later on that indeed this person was there. Well, zero knowledge leaves no evidence. because the verifier can actually cheat and produce the whole thing himself without having Alice involved. If you want to know how it works, so this I explained the principle. So you have, of course, completeness, that Alice can complete the proof. Soundness, that if Alice doesn't know the key, she can't compute the proof. And then zero knowledge, that means that even if Bob tries to cheat, he can only find out whether he spoke to Alice or not, but he cannot convince anybody else he did. And you can prove, like, based on this, that he didn't learn anything about Alice. So I probably won't have time to go to the protocol, but you can look at it. It's based on very simple observation of squaring. If I have time at the end, I may still do this. If not, you can look at it and ask questions. I will definitely not ask tricky questions about it, but here you can see as a simple example how it can work. Right? It's not very complicated. It's a very simple variant of a zero-knowledge protocol. And so why is it efficient? Because it only uses squaring, which is even more efficient than exponent 3. Okay, so here is more or less now the comparison. So we look at all the properties that end-to-end integration can have. So can you guess the secret? Can you eavesdrop on the channel? So can you actually achieve liveliness? Can Bob later on impersonate Alice somewhere else? So does he learn the secrets of Alice? Does Bob need a secret or not? And is there a math proof that, in fact, Bob learns nothing about the secret of Alice? And so if you go down the list, you see that we get more and more properties. And so you see passwords are actually terrible. They don't achieve anything good. And gradually, step by step, we get better properties. But of course, those things, if you use public key, you can no longer ask users to type it. So you have to have a physical connection. And so what you now see is actually a trend that we now finally start moving to this public key protocol. So of course, EMV is one of them. This is, in fact, these specs were written between 93 and 95. The rollout was late 90s. In the US was about 10 to 15 years ago. And my prediction is the system will disappear in 15 years because everything is now contactless and it has to go faster. And we will no longer do public key in 15 years. But it was a very nice time to have this. On the other hand, these protocols will replace passwords. So at K11, you've used already the K11 authenticator, right? So this is a startup of my group, developed this, and was recently acquired by It's Me. So will now be probably used by many more people in the future. So there we use public key to replace passwords finally, without having users to type or copy things, or without having to hook something up. So now you have actually better network connections, and you have a second device on the internet, and that makes it possible to now really finally get rid of passwords. But it's tricky because you have to do many things. So you can, in practice, of course, if you do passwords, one thing you can do is you can just use a normal challenge response and derive the key from the password. I write here password. I should really write a hash of the password, right? But of course, that's very insecure. Because if you do this, then the adversary will run through all the passwords and find out which one matches. Okay, so it's not going to work. It's better than sending a password, but it's not much better because you can collect this data and then search for the password. And most people can only remember a 30 or 40-bit key, so it's not good enough. So there was actually a clever way, and maybe it's a bit too early, but after we have key establishment, you all appreciate this better. What you can actually do, and again, you should look at the details again in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when we looked again at Diffie-Hellman. It looks very complex, but in fact it's very simple. You do Diffie-Hellman, but you encrypt the Diffie-Hellman with a password. That's what you do. And then you do some other steps as well. You'll understand later why we need those steps. But the core of the protocol is you encrypt Diffie-Hellman with your password. And this is much more secure because if you have this transcript here, so you actually intercept the communication, what happens is, well, you can, of course, guess the password. And if you guess the password, then you find the Diffie-Hellman exchange. But in fact, none of this, you can't find the Diffie-Hellman key, though, because Diffie-Hellman, if you have Diffie-Hellman after x after y, you can't find it after the xy. So in fact, you can't find the key, so you can't actually check whether your password guess is correct or not. So even if you have an intercept where the password is used, if you guess a password, you don't know whether it's correct or not. And so this protects you against this running to all the passwords. Of course, what you can always do is an online attack. You can guess a password and see whether the interaction works guess. So you generate the X and you do the Diffie-Hellman. But of course, that's a limited number of interactions you can try. That's called an active attack, where you try, I'm going to try to see whether Alice has his password, and you try it. And after 10 attempts, you will be locked out. Okay? But if you just intercept stuff, passive attacks, there is no way to find out whether you got the right guess of the password. Because you don't use your password in a Mac, you actually encrypt the Diffie-Hellman. And maybe it's a bit too soon, but think about it and look at this slide again in 3 weeks, and you say, oh, this is how it works. Okay? So today it's called PAKE, Password Authenticated Key Establishment. It's very cool technology, but it was never widely deployed because there were patents on it, and nobody wanted to pay. And what you do on the web, in fact, is you first do a key establishment, and then you send your password encrypted in the establishment. And so people don't bother to change that. But in fact, this is more secure also for the web if you still use passwords. But it's somehow, it's hard to catch on because of the patents first. And now there is so much established knowledge that nobody wants to bother to do this. But it's very, very nice idea. So this is again what you use in K11. So of course you don't see any of the secret, but what's behind this is public key identification. So more or less, when you register with a QR code, a key pair is put on your device. And then when you connect, the server sends to your device a challenge. It's a Sigma protocol, signed in MAC protocol, to your mobile device. And your device actually first authenticates you, so it checks your PIN code or your fingerprint locally. So your PIN code is never sent to any K11 server. They don't see your fingerprint or any of your secrets. If the PIN code is correct, then your device will sign and send this to over the mobile interface, over the wireless interface to the server. And with this signature, now the server lets you log in. Yes?
Why do you store the device type?
Why do I store the
Device type.
Where do you see that? Remember my device? Or? Well, of course, you can use it on multiple devices. So we store some information in the browser in the cookies, right? So that we actually know what your authentication mechanism is. So the browser has to know which mobile device they have to contact.
Then you could give the user the option to give a label or something.
Yes, but that is what smart people do. But you should always in security distinguish geeks and normal people, and you don't want to put any intellectual load on people. So everything you ask people to do is already too much. I think the nice thing of this protocol is that, in fact, you never have to enter your username, which is really amazing. This is all the protocols you have to give your username. Here you don't have to do it, and it's good because we have terrible usernames. Okay? And for the rest, you don't do anything else. And I think this is more or less my experience is that usability. That's the only thing the users care about. And you can say this is actually more secure, but yeah, that's good. But if it's usable, right? That's what counts. Yes, there would be many extensions and possibilities, but in the end, it's kind of the trick in this kind of things is make it easy to use for everybody. Yes. No, it's not open source, but the protocols are described in research papers. But of course, if you open source everything, then some big player will just copy your code and put you out of the market. That's the reality of the market today, right? It's ideally, in an ideal world, I would make it freely available, but then you can't. We spent 5 years developing this. We spent hundreds of thousands of euros, if not millions, to actually make this nice code, have all the easy management interfaces that just cost money. And that's in an ideal world, yes, it would be able to give it away, but I think we've actually needed some financial support from outside and from our own team to actually develop this. It just is a very big gap between making some demo app and making something that runs with hundreds of thousands of users. So you spend a lot of time on boring stuff, and it was a very small team. There was only 4 people developing this, but it's still a lot of work. It was 5 years work by 4 people. So you can see what that costs. But the protocols are public, so there is scientific papers describing the full detail. In fact, if you're interested, you can choose this paper and present it to your colleagues. And you can look at all the details. So there is something similar in Google. So Google, Facebook, and all the big players, they do something similar, which means they use FIDO Alliance. and it's called Google Security Keys, this internal technology, but it now has been upgraded and made mass market ready as Google Passkeys. So in fact, a few weeks ago, Google had been pushing passkeys as a new way to replace passwords. So it's by the big industry, so by big tech, so you have to understand that it follows their business model, which means every interaction has to go through them. That's the difference from Nextout. Nextout, this server is at the K11. It's not in Google or Facebook or Microsoft. This server is operated by K11, and you can manage your own server. It's not that Google is informed of every login, everybody, and it does it any place. So that's a very big difference in philosophy. And there's also some simple, so subtle security differences in terms of the server being authenticated, which was not part of the FIDO Alliance specifications. So initially, Google had this protocol with security keys. So the employees of Google, they got this kind of USB device, and you have to press a button to log in. That's all you have to do. And maybe give a password in some cases. And it's a very cool protocol. The description, I don't like to slow the slide because it's very messy. So the details, of course, are always messy. But maybe I should just explain it to you in words. It's much easier. So if you go to a website for the first time, the site has to support security keys or this Google Passkey. What you do is you make a key pair for this site. Okay? And so every time you're going to log into the site, you use challenge response, and you will sign the challenge, and you get sent a response. Okay? This is what you do. And if you push the button, then your security key computes the signature and sends the response. Okay, that's easy. Now, the problem is that you may have hundreds of sites, and so the problem is you can't store all your key pairs on there because then the device becomes more expensive. So Google has a very clever trick. They store just one key on there. And what you do is you take your public and private key, you encrypt it with this key, and you send it to the server, they store it for you. So every website stores your key pair, but encrypted under a key you only know. Okay, and so every time you go to a website, if you've been there before, you just ask for your encrypted key. Okay, you send it to a USB device, it decrypts it there, and now it can do the challenge response. And so the nice thing is that for every website, you have a different key. Of course, every website has to support this. So this is used already for, I think, 8 or 9 years, Google internally. But now the ideas are being transferred in the FIDO specification to Google Passkey. So more or less, Google wants you to, in this case, they will store the key pair on your device and encrypt it with your password. But they have some kind of improvements of passwords where they use similar principles, but you will log in the future with challenge response. And this is the case without having such a security key. Of course, if you work for Google and you lose your security key, well, then you can't work that day, right? Then you have to wait until they send you a new one. So most Googlers have 2 security keys because if one breaks down, you can't work. So they can't do this. You can't have something like this for 5 billion users on the internet, right? That doesn't work. Again, you get then billions of calls to your help desk. But so the passkey is a similar principle, but then actually software-based and local password-based. And of course, you can cache passwords and you cannot send them, whatever. So it's very easy to use, but more or less, it's their strategy to replace passwords by public keys. Of course, if you then lose your device or your mobile phone has no secure password, then your security is gone, and somebody who finds your phone can log in everywhere. So, but there is progress finally in dealing with this. So, there is actually many more problems. Here's a list of them. We'll go to them one by one, and you can look at the overview here. So, we focused so far on Alice proving to Bob she's Alice, but we have a very big problem called phishing, where more or less somebody sends you a link and say, hey, it's your bank, you have to check a transaction, or we think we lost, somebody tried to break into your account, or you have to move your money because we are being hacked, please help us move your money. And then people, of course, log in, and they log into the bad guy. So the problem is now, how does Alice know she's logging into Bob? And cryptographers thought, oh, that's an interesting attack, we can solve that. No, we can't, because this is a user decision. And there is no patch for stupidity. Okay, so it's very difficult to make users make smart decisions. And to be honest, even security experts sometimes get caught by phishing. Because it can be very, very hard for a user to say, is this the real site or not? I mean, to give you one example, some e-commerce sites, you do business with them, and so at the moment you pay, they send you to a completely random other site. How do you know this is a phishing or this is the real intention that for payment you go to some other party? We don't know. You can do half an hour research to find out. Maybe you find out, maybe not, or you can just click and hope that everything goes well. And that's what we do. So it's actually a very hard problem to solve. You can solve it for big websites where you can keep track of, for example, your browser could keep track, this is my bank, and say, or you have a special browser only for your bank, and you say, I only want to go to this website. So you could lock things down, but this is very tricky. Security smart people can do this, but it's kind of hard. And so more or less the approach of the industry is to detect phishing websites. So if they see a site that looks like their bank website, then they block it. Or if somebody loses their money, they find out what happened, and then they block that site. But every day, 20,000 new phishing sites are made, and it's like, it's an endless fight. And it's very difficult to stop it, and I can tell you the IDAS regulation will not stop it either. Okay, it's not because we tell that governments can only tell what identities are, it doesn't matter. You can't solve that problem. So it's a much harder problem than you think it is. Also, mutual authentication is not the same as Alice authenticating to Bob and Bob to Alice. They have to be linked to each other, as we will see. You have to connect the two sessions, otherwise it's not the same as just two separate things. So we use devices now because in our head we can't do RSA calculations. We can't even do a Mac in our head, so we have a device. It used to be an external device. Today it's our smartphone is our authentication device. Or your cards. But now if you lose your card, you're gone. Right? So if you lose this card, there is no PIN. So the only thing you can do is call the university and say, block my card. But in the meantime, before you've done that, anybody can enter all the offices you can or buildings you can enter. So, but for more important applications like your bank card, what happens is you have a PIN code, or for like the K11 authenticator, you use your biometry or a PIN code to authenticate to your device. And there, it's a local device, and you can put limits on the number of attempts. Like if your PIN for your bank card, you can make 3 attempts and then your card blocks. Why is this? Well, there's only 10,000 possibilities. And if you go try 100 times, well, then you just steal 100 cards and then you have the money. So it's a matter of security. Of course, you can still give your device to somebody else with the PIN code. This is why security people like biometrics, because biometrics you can't pass on. To show you how subtle this is, so the EMV specifications, so this is European MasterCard Visa, this is the credit card system. The development started 30 years ago. After 10 years, it was 5,000 pages. It's of course not only cryptography, the cryptography is only 800 pages. But every country has their own legacy systems, legacy, and all the variants and improvements. And for example, the Americans, they said, PIN codes are only for debit. For credit, we only sign stuff. We don't want PIN codes. That means that in the US, if you pay with EMV, in the UK as well, you can give your credit card to the merchant, he will put it in the reader, and then you get something to sign. This is called chip and sign. So your card computes a MAC, but you sign that it was you who was with the card. But in Europe, of course, it's chip and PIN, which means you enter your card in the reader and then you enter the PIN. That's how it was. Today it's contactless. You just wave your card and no PIN and whatever, and it's paid. Security goes down the drain, but they watch you all the time, so it's okay. You're secure. And they're secure too because they know everything you do anyway. But let's go back to chip and PIN. So the attackers found a very clever way to do stuff. So the people of Cambridge looked at those specs carefully, and they showed you can put a second chip on top of this chip. It's called a wedge device, and then so you actually find the card or you steal a card, but you don't know the PIN. So you glue a second PIN on top that does some manipulations, and then you go to a merchant, you buy your diamonds because you can export those easily, and you put the card in there, okay? But now you don't know the PIN. So you're not and it's like, diamonds is 5,000 pounds or whatever, so you can't get away without a PIN. But so this device now, this wedge device, solves the problem because it tells to the card, we don't check the PIN today, we check the signature. Please authorize the transaction. And it tells to the merchant the PIN has been checked. It's okay. And so the card believes that you will check the signature, and the terminal believes that the card has checked the PIN. And so it's a very clever attack that shows how difficult it is. You know, it seems all very simple, but nobody saw this attack until it was described by the Cambridge team. And then, of course, 2 years later, it was found in the wild. So there is some pictures on the ePrint server. I always forget to put them in my slide, but so David Nakash found and analyzed some of those wedge devices used by real criminals 2 years after publication of this paper. So biometrics is now coming because it's so cheap. Biometrics has as question, is this Alice, or is this question at the border? Is this really you? But of course, at the border, they want to do more. They want to check, like, we have a list of 100,000 people on a no-fly list and 100,000 terrorists. Are you on this list? And do you claim to be somebody else? Or they also may want to know, have you ever been to this country before under a different name? So this is much bigger problem because probably tens of millions of people have visited, and now you have to match somebody against tens of millions of people. Or the other problem is you have, or comparable is you have a crime scene, you find some fingerprints, and you have a database of criminals, and if we have to listen to our police forces, they have to have a database of everybody, their fingerprints. Right? That's what we're going to get in Belgium on your ID card. Is this person, do we know these fingerprints? So they're very different questions. So today we focus only on this question where we call identification, you match against the claim identity, no verification. There is many technologies. I'm not going to go into each of them, but they have different features. Ideally, everything is perfect, but some are easier to spoof, some are kind of harder to use. Eventually, we'll use DNA, and then we'll identify everybody uniquely, right? And they will find some tricks to separate twins, and then there will be no more escape. So in practice, what happens is you register somewhere. And so, for example, for the government, if you get a new ID card, they will take your 10 fingerprints. You will see why they don't take 2 or 1, they take 10. And so they will take several measurements until they have a good ID. Then they make a template. And then later on, if you show up, they will actually take your fingerprints again and match against this template and say, this is correct or not correct. And of course, you have false accept and false reject. So you can be very tough, but then you may reject the real user, or you can be very lenient, and then you will also accept impersonators. So if you have to go for your new identity card, my advice is that the day before, use a file and wipe away your fingerprints and see what happens. You can do this, but the file, if you spend enough time on all your fingers, in fact, almost nothing comes off. I don't think it's illegal, because some people actually don't have fingerprints. So you can claim to be one of them. So there is false accept and false reject, as I said, and so you have to choose the threshold. And so depending on the application, if it's nuclear rockets or nuclear missiles, you may not have false accept too many. But on the other hand, for a daily application, it's a problem. What is interesting is that this is probably quite reliable for a fingerprint. The fingerprint has false accept of about 2%. If the false reject is also 2%. So in fact, if you look at it, a fingerprint as a key, it's a 7-bit key. And researchers have actually made fingerprints that work for any finger. So you can make kind of generic fingerprints that work for 25 or 30% chance for any finger. So, but the people in biometrics, they're not interested in security like cryptographers, they're interested in selling stuff to the government. It's a very different world. If you do security analysis of biometrics, they really get upset with you because you're spoiling their business. Security is not important, selling is important. So fingerprint is important because it's widely available. The sensors are cheap already since 20 years. It's a small template. Of course, if you work a lot with your hands, they don't have nice fingerprints. And also it seems that some Asian women don't have very strong fingerprints and they have problems enrolling in some systems. So the first attack on fingerprints was done by a Japanese professor, cryptographer. So in the kitchen at home, he made gummy fingers. So he actually used the same material to make gummy bears, to actually produce gummy fingers. And at that moment, this is 20 years ago, he could actually spoof 80% of all fingerprint readers. It was a big shock and was something that they didn't accept. You shouldn't do this. But so today there is, I don't know, von der Leyen, she introduced the fingerprints on the German ID card, and she gave a picture, a press picture like this. And the hacker, a high-resolution picture, the hacker took it, and they actually made a gummy finger with her fingerprints on it. So this was her punishment. In fact, you can't keep it secret. That's a big problem with a fingerprint, that you leave them everywhere, right? So that's a major problem. So face we see more and more because it's more what we do as people. Of course, the problem now, it's so good that we can recognize anybody. You have a major privacy problem. You have to make this illegal. Okay. Of course, it can also be spoofed. In the beginning with a photo, today even Apple claims their schemes are very secure, but there is cases of a son of 6-year-old who can actually use the iPhone of his mother in spite of all the 3D and whatever, and ultraviolet and whatever sensors. The son of 6-year-old could just register with the same face as his mother and use her iPhone. So it could be a whole lecture, but I don't have time. But in principle, biometrics identifies the real person. It's user-friendly. You can't give it to your secretary or to somebody else. You can't share it. And it's easy to use. So we'll use it more and more. It has a major privacy problem. That's, of course, it can be taken anywhere. You can now be traced. It's technically possible to follow you everywhere where you are. Also, you leave your fingerprints everywhere. Your face, your picture can be taken everywhere. If you look into sensors closely, your eyes reveal a lot of medical data about you. Certain diseases are visible in the eye. In Malaysia, they introduced an identity card, which was also a bank card and a driver's license, protected by a fingerprint. So what happened? People with big knives came, and they cut off fingers. Because, you know, if you can empty somebody's bank account, you just steal their card, you cut off their finger, and then you can do everything. So as defense, today most fingerprint sensors check a pulse. Now, if you have a 9-volt battery and some small electronics, you can actually also make a pulse in a fingerprint. Okay. And the other problem is, these guys with the big knives, do they know that they will have to do this or not? They just keep cutting off fingers until it works. So if I can give you one advice, don't use fingerprints on any device with financial information. Just think about it, okay? You're going to end up in a place where people have big knives, and you will have a device with your financial stuff. And maybe they will not believe you if you say it will not work, and there is no financial information there, but at least you never know. Okay, so the long-term problem, or the long-term idea, is to use directly cryptographic keys from biometrics. But then you have to use biometrics that can be picked up immediately. So you have to use things internal to the body, where you have sensors on your body, and they actually take measurements inside your body that everybody else cannot take, because your face can be taken, your fingerprint can be taken. Everything that's visible is actually not secret, right? So biometrics is not secret. So it can be spoofed. So think about it more, because it's going to become more and more important, and it's not secure. It offers some stuff. It does some good things. It's very convenient, but it's not a replacement for cryptography and keys. And I'm not saying it's useless, but it has big privacy risks, and it has also security problems you should be aware of. And the vendors, they don't know what security is because you don't study security. That's a no-no, right? That's a waste of time, because it's better to sell. Okay, so I think we'll stop here. What we'll do next week is we'll look at authenticated key establishment, and this slide will motivate why we have to do this. So we will look at the next problem in cryptography, which is how can Alice and Bob authenticate and at the same time agree on a key, a new key which they can use to protect their communication. Okay, so see you next week.